And here it is, yet another loss for the Snyder fandom. And this one is kind of huge. This one might really hurt them more than you would think. Now, let's go back a couple years now. We know that Dwayne Johnson was ramping up, releasing Black Adam, and his goal was to eventually pit himself, Black Adam, against Superman. That was their goal. Their goal was to go up against Superman. But the kicker is, the fans, they believed wholeheartedly that the Superman that he was talking about, the only Superman that he could be considering going up against, was Henry Cavill's Superman. And for months, really years, as anticipation for Black Adam was building, that's all that was talked about. Well, shortly after James Gunn was announced being the head of the DCU, or I should say DC Studios, he stated that months prior to being hired in that role, he was hired to write a Superman movie. And, people were kind of upset. People were not really sure what to make of that. Everybody, even myself included, thought that it was Walter Hamada who hired him to do that. Everybody thought that Walter Hamada was going above his pay grade to hire people when he knew that he wouldn't be running DC in the near future. So what was going on at DC at the time? Now, I've talked about it many, many, many times. We know that The Rock was vying for control of the DC universe. We know that he and DeLuca and Abdi Paul Abdi and Mike DeLuca, they were vying for power. They were trying to take control, trying to be the ones who were running DC Studios, or the eventual DC Studios. They were trying so hard. They were trying to say, look, Black Adam is going to be a bona fide hit. And because of how big this movie is going to be, there's no way that David Zaslav won't hire us to run DC Studios. And that was the belief. At Comic-Con, the year that Black Adam came out, Dwayne Johnson was asked, point blank, by fans, by people at Comic-Con, is Henry Cavill going to be in Black Adam? And oddly enough, he was kind of taken aback by that, like that was some big surprise. And because of it, he and his team rushed to make a deal with Henry Cavill, not just to show up in Black Adam, but to film cameos for other upcoming films. But oddly enough, that is also around the time that somebody was hired to write a Superman movie. Now the question remains, what was going on at this time? Now, over on Threads, people constantly bombard James Gunn with questions about, what about this? What are you doing here? Why this? Why that? And he is gracious enough, and maybe to the detriment of his own reputation, but he is gracious enough to answer a lot of these questions. Now, I don't use Threads, so I'm going to take this over on the Twitters, and DCU Updates was kind enough to repost this on Twitter. And they posted, James Gunn says Mike DeLuca was the executive who hired James Gunn to write Superman around August 2022. That's very, very interesting. So if we take a look at the screenshot here, Real DC Fan 2025 over on Threads apparently has been bombarding James Gunn over there. Goes, always been curious about this, but especially which executive hired you to write Superman around August 2022? And James Gunn says, Mike DeLuca, of course. And then he goes, what's with the spammy screenshots? So, what does that say? What does that say? Does that mean that, well, James Gunn was going to write a Henry Cavill Superman movie? Think about that for a second. If that is true, just think about that for a second. All of the Snyder fans, all of the Snyder bros who rag on James Gunn, hate James Gunn, you were this close to getting a James Gunn, Henry Cavill Superman movie. Possibly. But then again, maybe his Superman would not have been the Henry Cavill Superman. We do know that he has adjusted the script since taking over the DC Studios, DCU, and that was because by directive by David Zaslav and by the direction that they wanted a 10-year plan. They wanted to have a much larger universe than what they were going to have had he continued that certain Superman script and continued the DCEU at the time. But it is pretty crazy to think that, well, a lot would have been different. Things would have been massively different had Mike DeLuca, Paul Abdy, and The Rock been in control. Quite possibly, we would not have what you all wanted. Everybody thought that the SnyderVerse would have been restored had The Rock continued and taken control. But that's not the case. And I've tried to say that multiple times. We may have gotten some, similarities here and there. But as I've said, and as a lot of people have said multiple times, Zack Snyder has said it, he has moved on. He's doing things with Netflix. He is happy with what he's doing. He closed that chapter of his life. The Rock, Abney, and DeLuca wanted to move in one direction. Gunn and Safran wanted to move in another direction. If Justin Lin got in, he wanted to move in another direction. There was no pathway that led to the SnyderVerse being restored, with the exception of bringing Zack Snyder back, which was never going to happen. So you kind of see, everybody just... You keep listening to grifters. You keep listening to people like Aaron Fisher, Sil Abdul. You keep listening to all of these people who claim they know what they're talking about for months and years, when they really have no idea what they're talking about. They just don't. You have to sit back and take a look at the big picture and understand the industry and understand what it is the studios would do. Understand how the studio and the industry works and understand what makes sense from a, standpoint of, money, and a standpoint of longevity, and a standpoint of success. What's going on in the industry? All of that. And the SnyderVerse just never made sense to continue. It sucks. I enjoyed what Zack made. It sucks. It really does. I love this comment here from @Valias, George over on Twitter. He goes, Mike DeLuca, the same guy who also tried to bring back the SnyderVerse and Black Adam, but the cult opted to boycott it, killing any hope the SnyderVerse had of coming back. The cult keeps taking L's. The funny thing about that is, he says, Mike DeLuca, the same guy who also tried to bring back the SnyderVerse and Black Adam, but the cult opted to boycott it. First off, it's plainly obvious now that he wasn't really trying to bring back the SnyderVerse. He was trying to bring Henry Cavill in. That's all he did. He brought back Henry Cavill. And probably if James Gunn was writing a Superman movie, it was probably not going to be Henry Cavill, and they probably would have had to adjust in making it Henry Cavill after bringing Cavill into it. It's that simple. That simple. Super Society goes, but Snyder Cultists and Mike DeLuca wanted the SnyderVerse back? ? No way. I thought Snyder fans said Mike DeLuca wanted the SnyderVerse back. Is there any truth of what's going with these people who seem to keep messing up DC? Just leave it. It's not worth it. James Gunn, where are we at here? There's no more. Anyways, I mean, it's getting to the point where we see more and more truth coming out of what was going on at DC around that time. People want to sit there and blame DC. They want to blame James Gunn for Henry Cavill's departure. But then you sit here and you start to understand that DeLuca, Abney, and The Rock are the reason why Henry Cavill is no longer Superman. They are the reason why everything that happened to Cavill. They brought him in when they didn't have a job, when they did not have the job to bring him in for the long haul. They are the ones that told him to announce that he was here to stay when they didn't know what was going on with DC. They're the ones that said, hey, you don't have a contract, but it's okay. Announce that you're back. Announce that there's a big plan. There's a reason why Henry Cavill then fired his management team after that. There's a reason why he has distanced himself from all of that since then. There's a reason why he has moved over and quite possibly taking a large role at Marvel Studios. It's because, not because of James Gunn, not because of Peter Safran, not because of David Zaslav. They are not the ones who screwed Henry Cavill. His management team, The Rock, Abney, DeLuca, they're the ones who screwed him over. But you're not ready to hear that, right? You're not ready to see things like this, to understand that the people who you thought were your saviors, the ones who you thought were going to give you what you wanted, never cared about you. And it's more and more obvious every single day. Let me know your thoughts. I want to hear what you have to say about all this. It's really, really interesting. It's shocking, honestly, that it finally has come out. Things like this are finally coming out. I love to see it. I love to hear it. So let me know what your thoughts are. Hit that like button, hit subscribe. And with all that said, I'll catch you all later.